Clara died in March, and I had been eating from cans since April. This is not a complaint. I want to be clear about that before anything else. It is a fact about the specific way that grief reorganizes a man's life, not the dramatic ways, not the ways people expect, but the small ones, the daily ones, the ones that accumulate into a new shape of living that you do not entirely recognize as your own. Clara had cooked every meal in this house for 22 years. After Clara, there was no cooking because cooking had been Clara's thing, and attempting it myself produced food that was technically food and nothing more. And after 2 weeks of technically food, I had driven to town and bought cans and opened them and eaten what was in them and found that this was sufficient for the purpose of continuing, which was the only purpose I was attending to. The farm ran. I want to be clear about that too. The grief had not taken the farm. The wheat was in the ground for the fall planting. The cattle were in the winter pasture. The fences were maintained. I went to bed tired every night from the work, and I got up in the dark every morning because the farm required it, and I had been getting up in the dark for the farm for 30 years, and the habit was stronger than the grief, which was perhaps the only thing that was. The Aldrin property to the east had been George and Nora Aldrin's since they married in 1929. George was a quiet man, a good neighbor, the kind you traded work with during the heavy seasons and borrowed equipment from when yours was in for repair. Nora I had known less well. Clara had known her better, the women of neighboring properties having more occasion than the men to be acquainted, but I knew her the way you know your neighbors when you have lived beside them for 6 years, which is to say, well enough to wave and not well enough to know what she was thinking. George went to the hospital in October. Respiratory. The kind of illness that settles in the chest and does not want to leave. I heard this from Ed Pruitt at the feed store, who heard everything in Meade County before anyone else did, and I had noted it with the specific attention I paid to the situations of the farms around me, fully and without commentary, and had gone on with my own work. In November, Nora planted a winter garden. I knew this because the Aldrin property's east garden ran along our shared fence line, and on a Tuesday in early November, I was at the fence checking a section of wire that had been showing some give, and she was on the other side of the fence turning the soil with a spade. She was wearing the dark green wool coat, and her dark auburn hair was coming out of the knot at the back of her head in pieces, which it did, I later learned, by mid-morning regardless of how it had started, and the cold had brought the color up in her cheeks and the nose, and she was working the soil with the specific attention of someone who knows what they are doing and is doing it. I stood at the fence and watched her for a moment before she noticed me. "Mr. Alderson," she said. She had paused with the spade and was looking at me with the hazel eyes, green in the November light, more gold at the edges. "Mrs. Aldrin," I said, "how is George?" "Improving," she said. "The doctor thinks February, maybe March." "I'm glad to hear he's improving," I said. "Thank you," she said. She looked at the soil she had been turning. "I'm putting in the cold weather things, turnips and kale mostly, some winter radishes." She paused. "Most people don't bother in November." "Clara used to," I said. It arrived in my mouth before I decided to say it. Nora looked at me. The hazel eyes did something. "I know," she said. "She showed me, the first winter we were here. She said the ground could still take it if you got it in before the hard freeze." I looked at the turned soil. At the November sky above us, the flat gray of a Kansas November that is deciding whether to snow. "It can," I said, "if you get it in this week." "That's what I'm doing," she said. She went back to turning the soil. I went back to the fence wire. We worked on our respective sides of the property line for another hour without talking, which was not uncomfortable. It was the natural quiet of two people doing separate work in adjacent spaces, which is a specific kind of company that farmers understand without having to name it. When I finished the fence wire, I gathered my tools and nodded to her on the way past. She nodded back. Her hands were dirty from the soil, and there was a piece of auburn hair across her forehead that she blew out of the way without using her hands. I drove back to the house and opened a can of soup. She planted the extra row the following Thursday. I was at the fence again. I had found another section that needed attention, which was true, and which was also not the only reason I was at that particular section of fence on a Thursday morning, and she was on the other side putting in a row that ran parallel to the fence line, closer to it than the other rows she had planted. "Extra row?" I said. She looked up from the seed packet in her hand. "Kale," she said. "Does well in the cold, does better with a windbreak." She gestured at the fence. "The fence will help." "Yes," I said. "It will." She went back to planting. I went back to the fence wire I had been pretending needed attention. The morning was cold and clear, and the soil she had turned was dark and ready, and she worked through it with the unhurried certainty of someone who has done this before and knows what she is doing. I did not ask about the extra row. She did not explain it. In December, the first of the winter garden came in. I found the basket at my gate on a Tuesday morning, a small wooden basket, the kind Clara had kept in the kitchen, with a dishcloth over the top. Underneath the cloth, 4 turnips, a bundle of kale, 2 winter radishes. The turnips were good ones, properly sized, not the small failures that an insufficiently prepared soil produces. The kale was deep green and substantial. She had known what she was doing when she put this in. I stood at the gate with the basket in my hands for a while. There was no note. There was no indication that this required a response. It was a basket of vegetables left at a gate, which is something neighbors do, which has always been something neighbors do, and which did not require analysis. I brought it inside and put it on the kitchen counter and looked at it for a while longer than was strictly necessary. I did not open a can for supper that night. I made a turnip soup. The recipe was not Clara's. Clara's recipe was somewhere in the box of index cards that I had not opened since March, and I did not attempt to find it. I made a turnip soup from what I knew about turnip soup, which was enough, and it was better than the can, and I ate it at the kitchen table and looked at the basket on the counter. The following week, I left the basket at her gate, with eggs. My hens were laying well in December, which was unusual. Most years, December was thin for eggs, and I had more than I needed, and she had left the basket, and the eggs went in the basket, and I left it at her gate on Tuesday morning before first light and drove back to my own property. She did not come to my gate. I did not go to hers. There was no acknowledgement of the eggs the way there had been no acknowledgement of the basket. No note, no mention at the fence, nothing that required the exchange to be named as an exchange. The basket came back the following Tuesday, with more kale and the first of the winter radishes, and, this time, a jar of something amber-colored that turned out to be apple butter, which I had not tasted since Clara made it in October of the year before she died. I sat with the jar of apple butter for a long time. I put eggs in the basket, and I added a jar of the honey my hives had produced in October, which I had 4 of, and which were going to sit in the cellar until spring if I did not give them away, and I left the basket at her gate the following Tuesday. This continued through December and into January. The basket went back and forth across the fence line once a week, every Tuesday, growing in its contents as each of us added what we had to what had been sent. She sent kale and turnips and the preserved things she had put by in the fall. I sent eggs and honey, and as January wore on and I found the specific motivation that the basket had produced in me, things I had made, a jar of the apple butter recipe I found on a card in the box I finally opened, a loaf of bread that was not Clara's bread but was bread, a dozen oatmeal cookies that I made from a recipe on the back of the oat tin because I did not have Clara's recipe for those, and the ones on the tin turned out to be fine. She left no note acknowledging the bread. I left no note acknowledging the kale. The basket went and came and went and came, and neither of us said anything about it at the fence on the Tuesday mornings when we happened to both be there. Except that we talked more at the fence, not about the basket, about the winter, about the cold weather things in the garden and how the kale was holding through the January freezes and whether the February planting window was going to open early or late this year. About George's letters from the hospital, which she mentioned occasionally in the matter-of-fact way she mentioned everything, not asking for sympathy, just reporting. About the hens and why December had been a good laying month, which I could not explain but appreciated. About the wheat in the ground and whether it was going to make it through January under the thin snow cover and what I was planning for the spring planting. Real conversations. The kind that happen between two people who know the same land and the same weather and the same conditions of a Kansas winter, who have been having the abbreviated version of this conversation at a fence line for 6 years and are now somehow having the full version. I noticed when this happened. I noticed it the way I notice things, completely and without making a production of the noticing. In January, she mentioned that the Aldrin barn's east wall had developed a problem. The boards at the base were soft from the previous summer's moisture, and she was worried about the structural integrity through the winter. She said it the way she said things, as information rather than a request. I went to look at it on a Saturday morning. She was inside when I arrived, and came out when she heard the truck, and we walked to the east wall, and I looked at the boards. The bottom 2 courses need replacing, I said. The ones above them are sound. I thought so, she said. I have the lumber. I haven't been able to get it done. I can do it, I said. She looked at me. The hazel eyes, green this morning in the January light. Eli, she said. I have the tools and the skills, and it's a Saturday, I said. It's 2 hours of work. She looked at the barn wall. You don't have to, she said. I know I don't, I said. Do you want me to or not? She was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. Thank you. I did the barn wall in 2 hours. She brought coffee at mid-morning and stood beside the wall, and we drank the coffee and looked at the work, and she said it was good work. I told her the boards she had were good quality, which they were. We stood in the January cold with the coffee and the barn wall between us and the specific quiet of a January morning on the Kansas plains around us. I should have introduced myself earlier, she said. When Clara died, I should have come over. I looked at the replaced boards. It was March, I said. People don't always know what to do in March. I didn't know what to do, she said. I didn't want to impose. You didn't impose, I said. I wasn't there, she said. No, I said. But you planted the extra row. She looked at me. Something in her expression shifted. The quick-sighted thing that was not quite the smile, but was related to it. You noticed that, she said. I noticed, I said. It was just kale, she said. I know what it was, I said. We drank the coffee. The Kansas January held us both in its flat, cold way. The barn wall was repaired and the coffee was warm and the basket was at home on my kitchen counter with Tuesday 2 days away. Eli, she said. Yes, I said. George is going to be home in February, she said. The doctor wrote last week, probably the 2nd week of February. That's good, I said. I'm glad. Yes, she said. She was looking at the barn wall. So am I. We stood for a moment. The January morning, the steam from the coffee cups, the repaired barn wall and the winter garden visible around the corner of the barn, the kale standing in the cold. What will you do in the spring? I said. With the garden. She looked at it. Plant more, she said. The cold weather things did better than I expected. I'm going to expand it. She paused. Clara was right about the November planting. She usually was, I said. Yes, she said. I drove home that afternoon and looked at the basket on the kitchen counter and thought about February and George coming home and what the basket would mean after that, which was what it had always meant, a neighbor leaving vegetables at a gate, and what it had also become, which was a conversation that 2 people had been having in the specific language of baskets and eggs and oatmeal cookies and barn walls all winter. Both things were true. They could both stay true. The basket came on Tuesday as usual. More kale, a jar of preserved green beans from the summer garden, and tucked at the side, a piece of paper. The first note in 2 months of baskets. I unfolded it. It said, "The bread was very good. N." 3 words, a letter and a period. I sat at the kitchen table with the note for a while. Then I got a piece of paper from the drawer and a pencil, and I wrote, "Thank you for the apple butter, E." And I folded it and put it in the basket with the eggs and the second jar of honey and a loaf of bread that was better than the first one because I had been practicing. Tuesday morning, I left the basket at her gate. In February, George came home. I saw the truck from across the field, a Meade County Hospital vehicle bringing him to the lane, and then George getting out slowly, the specific careful movement of a man who has been ill for 4 months and is being returned to his life. Nora was at the door. I watched from a distance, and I thought about the baskets and the eggs and the note and the extra row of kale and what all of it was and what all of it wasn't. And I concluded that it was what it was, which was a winter of 2 people keeping each other company across a fence line in the only language available to them, and that this was a thing that had its right shape, and I was not going to distort it. The basket went to the Aldrin gate on Tuesday as usual. It came back on Thursday, a day late, which I understood because George was home and things were different now, and Thursday was fine. The kale was in it, and eggs. Nora's eggs from the Aldrin hens, which I had not had before. I put turnip soup in a jar and left it at the gate on Friday. It was the recipe I had developed over the winter, not Clara's recipe, mine, the one I had been refining since December, the one that was better each time. On Saturday morning, I was at the fence checking the wire I checked every Saturday, and Nora was in the garden, and George was visible on the porch behind the house, sitting in the sun, recovering. She looked up when she heard me at the fence. "The soup," she said. "George says it's the best soup he's had." "The turnips are good ones," I said. "He wants to know where I got it," she said, the quick-sighted thing at the corner of her mouth. "What did you tell him?" I said. "I told him the truth," she said, "that my neighbor makes it." She looked at the garden. "He wants to thank you himself when he's well enough to walk the fence line." "Tell him there's no need," I said. "He'll do it anyway," she said. "George is like that." "That's all right," I said. She went back to the garden. I went back to the fence wire. The February sun was on the winter garden, and the kale was still standing through it all, solid and dark green, and exactly what you planted it to be. "Nora," I said. She looked up. "The spring planting," I said. "When you expand the garden, if you want an opinion on the layout, the drainage on this side of the fence runs east. If you put the brassica rows east to west, you'll get better drainage than north to south." She looked at the garden, at the fence, at me. "I'll remember that," she said. "Clara figured it out the 3rd year," I said. "Took me a while to see why it worked." "I'll use east to west," she said. "Good," I said. Spring came the way Kansas springs come, not gently, not all at once, but in the specific incremental way of a season arriving after a hard winter, each week a degree warmer, the ground softening, the first green things showing in the places where the garden had been. Nora expanded the garden the way she said she would, east to west rows the way I had said, and the spring planting went in with the same competent, unhurried attention she brought to everything. The basket continued on Tuesdays. George was well enough by April to wave from the field when I drove past, and in May he came to the fence and shook my hand and thanked me for the soup and for keeping an eye on Nora through the winter, which I received with the specific discomfort of a man being thanked for something that was more complicated than the thanking suggested. I said it was nothing, which was not true, and George said it was something, which was also true, and we left it at both. Clara had been gone a year by March. I had been eating from cans from April to November and from the basket from December on, and the specific nutritional and practical improvement of the second period over the first was measurable and real. But that was not all of what the winter had been. I knew that, and I did not say it to anyone, and I did not need to. The extra row of kale came up again in November. She planted it the same Tuesday she had planted it the year before, and I was at the fence checking the wire, and she was on the other side with her spade and her auburn hair coming out of the knot by mid-morning and the green gold of her eyes in the November light. "Extra row again," I said. "It did well last year," she said. "Yes," I said, "it did." She planted the row. I finished the fence wire. The Kansas November went about its business around us, the flat gray sky, the cold that was deciding whether to commit, the ground still willing to take a seed if you gave it one. "Eli," she said. "Yes," I said. "I'm going to put apple butter up this week," she said. "I've got more apples than I planned on." "Clara's recipe or yours?" I said. She looked at me. "Mine," she said. "I've been adjusting it, a little more cinnamon." "Let me know how it turns out," I said. "I will," she said. She went back to the kale. I went back to the fence. The November afternoon held us both on our respective sides of the property line, which was the line it had always been, the line two neighboring farms share, no more and no less, and also everything in between. The basket went on Tuesday. It always went on Tuesday. That is the shape of the thing, and I am not going to make it into more than its shape, because its shape is already everything it needs to be.